My childhood bully became my landlord and spreads rumors that I'm a freeloader while raising my rent. When I was 9, I got pushed off the swing set by a kid named Justin, now 31M, in front of the entire 4th grade recess crowd. I ended up with skinned palms, a torn shirt, and a bruised ego. After that, Justin spent most of my childhood taunting me. If it wasn't my hand-me-down sneakers he made fun of, it was my glasses or my tendency to read at lunch instead of playing soccer. In a small town, a bully has a long memory, and so does their target. I remember the names he used to call me: Egghead, Twig, Nerdless. They might sound almost silly now, but when you're a kid desperate to fit in, those taunts slice through you like razors. As we got older, the bullying escalated from playground shoves to more insidious pranks. He'd snap the strap of my backpack, hide my books, or mock me in front of whichever crowd he was entertaining that day. Teachers seldom intervened effectively. Justin always managed to look innocent when authority figures were around. I recall plenty of nights crying in my bed, wishing I could just vanish or change schools. But I didn't vanish, and we never moved. The bus rides, the cafeteria lines, the walk home, Justin seemed to be there, ready with a smirk or a shove. When middle school ended, I dared to hope high school might be different, but he was in half my classes and nothing changed. The only difference was that now we were older, and the bullying took on a sharper edge. He mocked my acne, spread rumors about me having a crush on the principal, even tried to sabotage my group projects. My parents advised me to turn the other cheek, but that never really helped. Sometimes I snapped back, sometimes I tried ignoring him. But Justin was persistent, thriving on the reactions he provoked. Even so, I tried to keep my head down, focusing on my schoolwork. I told myself that once I graduated, I'd never have to see him again. At 18, I left town to go to a community college about an hour away. It felt like freedom, a chance to shed those painful memories. I spent 2 years getting an associate's degree in graphic design. From there, I hopped between small gigs, trying to establish myself as a freelance designer. My parents ended up retiring and moving out of state to be closer to my grandmother, so I was on my own, but I liked the independence. Money was tight, though, and city living was expensive. When a friend of a friend told me about a decent job at a marketing firm back in my old town, I hesitated. I never wanted to go back, but at the same time, rent was cheaper there, and I'd be closer to the few high school friends who'd stuck around. So I convinced myself that Justin was probably gone. After all, it'd been years. He wouldn't stick around that small place forever, right? As it turned out, I was wrong. By the time I moved back, I was 26, and I quickly discovered that Justin still lived in town. Worse yet, he'd become something of a local businessman, though that term might be too generous. He inherited his grandfather's properties, a couple of apartment complexes, and some storefronts, and decided to run them. Rumor had it he wasn't great at it. People said he rarely maintained the buildings, ignored tenants' complaints, and was prone to fits of temper if rent wasn't on time. I heard these rumors but brushed them off. It's a small town, so gossip is always swirling. Besides, I had zero interest in crossing paths with him again. My plan was to live cheaply, work at the marketing firm, and hopefully save up enough to eventually move someplace bigger. But life has a way of twisting the knife. After a few months in a cramped sublet, I was desperate for a better place. A friend linked me to a listing for a spacious one-bedroom with updated appliances at a surprisingly reasonable price. The landlord's name wasn't listed, just the property management contact. I arranged a viewing and everything seemed okay. The apartment was an older unit in a converted Victorian house near downtown, high ceilings, decent natural light, a bit of a musty smell from old carpets, but nothing major. I filled out the application, got approved, and signed the lease in a flurry of paperwork. The landlady who handled it was an older woman named Lorraine, who said she was stepping in for her nephew who technically owned the property. I didn't think much of it, just happy to have found somewhere that wasn't a dump within my budget. Moving day arrived. I got a U-Haul, roped in a couple of coworkers to help, and by afternoon I was lugging boxes up the creaky staircase. That's when I heard a voice behind me, a voice that sent a jolt of shock through my spine. Well, if it isn't the little shrimp, watch out. Those boxes look heavier than you. I turned, and there he was, Justin, leaning against the banister, right, wearing a smug grin. My heart sank. He was no longer the lanky teen I remembered. He'd filled out a bit, carrying himself with a more adult swagger. But that sneer was the same. I felt my stomach clench with the old, familiar dread. For a moment, I was too stunned to respond. Then he gave a short laugh, said something like, "Long time no see," and walked off, whistling. I stood there, box in my arms, heat pounding in my cheeks. My coworker, arms full of pillows, asked me if I was okay. I forced a smile, said everything was fine. But it wasn't. A quick conversation with Lorraine later confirmed my worst fear. Justin was the actual landlord, the property owner, though it was all in his grandfather's name originally. Lorraine was just handling the administrative side. "He stops by sometimes," she told me with a shrug. "He's mostly hands-off, but he likes to check on the units now and then." Part of me wanted to flee. But I'd already signed a year lease, paid a security deposit. I didn't have the funds or time to find yet another place. And maybe I told myself it wouldn't be so bad. We were adults now, right? Maybe Justin would be mature enough not to mess with me. Still, a knot of anxiety formed in my stomach, a sense that this was about to become a nightmare. At first, things were relatively quiet. Justin didn't appear for a couple of weeks. I settled in, bought some thrift store furniture, painted one of the walls with Lorraine's permission, tried to make the place feel like home. My new job was demanding, but interesting. I spent my days creating promotional materials, designing ad campaigns, and starting to form a small social circle with my coworkers. Every so often, I'd pass Justin in the hallway or see him in the yard, talking to one of the other tenants, but we mostly avoided each other. It felt tense, but I told myself maybe we could ignore each other's existence. That illusion shattered when my bathroom sink started leaking badly. I texted Lorraine about it. She said Justin would handle repairs. I waited, juggling a bucket under the sink to catch the drips. No one came. Days stretched into a week. Every time I texted Lorraine, she repeated that Justin would handle it soon. Finally, water started pooling on the floor, and I worried about mold or rotting wood. I texted Justin directly, got no reply. I took a morning off from work to corner him in the building's parking lot. He was unlocking his pickup truck, about to drive off. I explained the situation, tried to keep my voice calm. He shrugged, said he'd get around to it, then drove off. My frustration soared. After another week, I ended up calling a plumber myself, something the lease said the landlord was responsible for. The plumber fixed the leak in a day, charging a couple $100. I emailed the invoice to Lorraine, expecting reimbursement. She texted back that Justin refused to authorize payment because I hadn't gotten approval first. Furious, I confronted him the next time he showed up. He smirked, leaning against the doorframe of my apartment, arms folded, like he was back on the playground. "You're supposed to go through official channels," he said. "That means you wait for me. Otherwise, you can pay for it yourself. Freeloaders don't get special treatment." "Freeloader?" I echoed, stunned. I paid my rent on time. I even had the canceled checks to prove it, but he just rolled his eyes, grinning like he'd scored a point. "You're always expecting special treatment, just like in school," he said. Mr. Favorite Student, Mr. Big Shot. My blood boiled. That had been his tactic back then, pretend that I was the teacher's pet or something, use it as an excuse to make me a target. We argued, voices echoing in the hallway, until another tenant poked her head out to see what was happening. Embarrassed, I stormed back inside, slamming the door. That night, I wrote a furious email to Lorraine, copying Justin, threatening to report them to the local housing authority if I wasn't reimbursed for the plumber. No response. 2 days later, a typed letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from Justin's management, stating that due to the rising costs of upkeep, my rent was being increased by 10% starting next month. My lease had a clause that rent couldn't be raised within the first year, but the letter twisted language about extra services and tenant-initiated repairs. It cited some obscure local ordinance that might or might not have applied. I was livid. This had to be retaliation. I tried contacting legal aid, but the process was slow, and a consultation indicated that landlord-tenant laws in our county heavily favored landlords. Meanwhile, word around the building was that Justin had been trash-talking me to the other tenants. One neighbor, an older woman named Greta, pulled me aside and said, Hey, I don't believe what he's saying, but he keeps telling people you complain all the time and don't pay your rent. He called you a freeloader. I told him, I know for a fact you pay on time, but he's not listening. My stomach twisted. This was going beyond personal spats. He was trying to poison my reputation with my neighbors. In a small town, rumors spread quickly. I dreaded the idea of people thinking I was some deadbeat. Sure enough, I started noticing the cold shoulders from certain tenants who'd been friendly before. One morning, as I was heading out, I heard two of them whispering about how they'd heard stories, that I was a mooch who demanded freebies. I spun around to confront them, but they just shuffled away, looking awkward. It was like high school all over again, the rumor mill, the snide remarks, all orchestrated by Justin. I tried focusing on my job, telling myself I'd handle it, but my stress soared. At night, I'd stare at the ceiling, heart pounding, replaying scenes of Justin taunting me. I started catching glimpses of him outside my window, talking to neighbors with that same smirk. I began to fear he might raise my rent again or fabricate reasons to evict me. He had all the power now. I was stuck unless I broke my lease, which would cost me dearly in penalties. As if things weren't bad enough, my boss at the marketing firm pulled me aside one day and said he'd heard some chatter from someone claiming I was unreliable when it came to rent. He asked if I was financially stable, hinting it could reflect on my work. Embarrassed, I assured him it was just a personal grudge from someone in my past. My boss nodded but looked uncertain. I realized Justin must have contacted him or someone at my job to spread these lies. This was a new low. He was actively trying to sabotage not just my home life, but my career. I decided I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. After work, I drove straight to the local housing authority. The building was small, a drab government office with flickering fluorescent lights. I spoke to a clerk who listened politely, took some notes, but said the official complaint process was lengthy. They'd need evidence of harassment, receipts for my own rent payments, a copy of my lease. I provided everything I could, including screenshots of texts with Lorraine. The clerk said they'd be in touch, but warned me that enforcement was minimal unless there was a clear legal violation. The rent increase might be contested, but it could take months. Frustrated but determined, I started documenting everything. Every text, every conversation with neighbors about rumors, every time Justin showed up. I bought a small recording device. I wasn't sure if it was legal to record him, so I checked. In my state, it's a one-party consent for recordings, so I began discreetly recording our interactions. My hope was to catch him admitting he was doing this out of spite. The tension escalated one Friday night. I returned from a late shift, hauling my laptop bag and a bag of groceries up the stairs. Justin was perched on the second floor landing, apparently chatting with another tenant. As soon as he saw me, his eyes gleamed. "Oh, look. The big freeloader's back," he called out. I ignored him, focusing on unlocking my apartment door. He made a snide remark about how I should pay rent with all that grocery money instead of getting fancy food. My temper flared. I spun around, snapping that I always paid rent, that he was a liar. He just laughed. "Sure you do," he said. "That's why everyone thinks you're mooching. People see you with expensive coffee every morning, but you're whining about a sink repair?" My voice shook. "You know that's not true. I pay full rent. I've never missed a payment," he shrugged. "I guess we'll see. I might have to raise your rent again if the building's finances don't add up." I fumed, chest tight. "You can't just threaten me like that," I said, pulling out my phone, pressing record as discreetly as I could. He rolled his eyes, stepping closer with a threatening posture. "Yeah? What are you going to do about it? Face it, you can't afford a fancy lawyer. The cops don't care. You're stuck here. And guess what? I can make living here hell if I want." He gave a crooked grin. The neighbor quickly excused themselves, slipping into their apartment. I stood there, phone in hand, heart hammering. Justin lowered his voice, leaning in. "I remember how easy it was to make you squirm in high school," he whispered. "Guess what? It's still easy." Then he turned and headed down the stairs, whistling. My hand trembled so badly I nearly dropped my phone. The sense of powerlessness, of being cornered, overwhelmed me. But at least I'd recorded that interaction. That night, I emailed the audio file to my personal email, labeling it as evidence. The next day, I tried contacting a local tenants' rights group, but it was volunteer run and slow to respond. They told me to keep documenting, and if I felt unsafe, I could apply for a protective order, but that was typically for domestic violence or severe harassment cases. I wasn't sure if I qualified. Justin hadn't made overt threats of violence, just intimidation. Things got worse the next week. My electricity randomly went out while the rest of the building seemed fine. I asked a neighbor if they had issues. They didn't. I texted Lorraine, no response. I ended up flipping the breaker myself, and it worked again, but I suspected Justin had tampered with it. Another morning, I found my mailbox stuffed with junk flyers that I hadn't seen anywhere else. I suspected he was rifling through my mail, but I couldn't prove it. Then, on a Sunday afternoon, I noticed a paper taped to the main entrance. Unit 2C is late on rent. Pay up or get out, in big bold letters. 2C was my unit. My jaw dropped. I'd paid rent 2 days earlier. I even had the receipt from depositing a check into Justin's management account. Furious, I tore down the paper. A neighbor told me Justin had posted it that morning. They thought I really was behind on rent. My face burned with humiliation. I retreated to my apartment, shaking with anger. This was targeted harassment, plain and simple. I wrote another email to the housing authority, attaching photos of the posted notice, my bank statement showing the rent cleared, and the voice recording from the other night. I demanded action. A day later, I got a reply from an official who said they'd open a file on Justin's conduct and would try to schedule a meeting with him. I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe some official pressure would rein him in. But Justin wasn't done. He started contacting my job again. A coworker who'd gone to high school with us overheard a conversation from a manager who said, "This Justin guy claims your employee's not paying his bills and might be facing eviction." I confronted the manager, explained the situation. She was sympathetic, but also said, "Look, we can't have personal drama interfering with work. Is there any chance you can move?" My stomach churned. This was exactly what Justin wanted: to isolate me, ruin my standing, force me out. But I couldn't let him sabotage my job. Late one evening, I heard a knock on my door. Bracing myself, I checked the peephole. No one. I found an envelope on the ground. Inside was a crudely typed letter. "You think you can run to the authorities? Good luck. I'll raise your rent every month if I have to. You'll never escape me, shrimp." My hands shook, adrenaline surging. The letter wasn't signed, but it was obviously from Justin. He was referencing my complaint to the housing authority. I snapped photos of the letter, emailed them to the official. They replied that I should probably call the police about potential harassment. But was this enough for the cops to care? I decided to try anyway. The responding officer was polite but non-committal. He said there was no direct threat of violence, so it was more of a civil matter. He suggested I keep any evidence in case I wanted to file for a restraining order. I felt a wave of despair. Justin knew exactly how to toe the line. He hadn't threatened my life, just used intimidation, rumors, and small acts of sabotage to make me miserable. At work, the stress was affecting me. My boss noticed I was on edge, missing deadlines. My performance review was coming up, and I worried it'd be negative. I tried explaining, but it's hard to put into words how a bully from your childhood is systematically trying to ruin you as an adult. It sounds almost childish. The same coworker who helped me move ended up pulling me aside to ask if I was okay. I vented to him. He looked shocked, saying, "I had no idea Justin was this kind of monster. In school, I remember him being a jerk, but this is extreme." He offered to help me in any way, maybe put me in touch with his cousin, who was a paralegal. I took the cousin's number, figuring I needed all the help I could get. The paralegal cousin listened to my story, looked at the documents I had, voice recordings, the typed letter, photos of posted notices, and said it was definitely harassment. She wasn't sure how strong a case I had if we went to small claims court or tried to get a protective order, but it was worth writing a stern legal letter. She drafted one for me, threatening a lawsuit for defamation and harassment unless Justin stopped and compensated me for the plumber's bill. I sent the letter by certified mail to Justin's official address. Then I waited, pulse racing with anxiety. A few days passed with no word from Justin. I hoped maybe he'd back off. But the morning my rent was due again, a new letter appeared on my door. "Your rent is now increased by another 10%. If you don't pay the new amount, You're in default of the lease. Enclosed was some nonsensical addendum referencing the cost of tenant disputes. Furious, I took it straight to the housing authority's office, demanding immediate action. The clerk frowned and said they'd schedule a hearing. My paralegal friend said this was blatant retaliation, which should be illegal, but proving it could be an uphill battle. Legally, they might argue new operating costs or something. Out of desperation, I asked neighbors if they'd testify that Justin was only raising my rent, not theirs, and that I always paid on time. Some were sympathetic, but most didn't want to get involved. They feared Justin's wrath. One neighbor confided that Justin had threatened to terminate their month-to-month lease if they caused trouble. The entire building was under his thumb, and I was the one challenging him. It felt like we were all stuck in his twisted little fiefdom. I got another letter from Justin. Saw you talking to neighbors, stirring up trouble. Keep it up and I'll evict you. Another day, I came home to find the front door lock had been changed and my key no longer worked. I pounded on the door until a neighbor let me in through the back. My own door lock was untouched, but the building's entrance lock was different. I demanded a new key, and Lorraine told me I could pick one up at Justin's office across town. She said he'd only give it to me if I paid a replacement fee. Furious, I realized this was another petty tactic. I marched to his office, a dingy space above a rundown bar, and demanded my key. He told me it would cost $50. I threatened to call the police. He smirked, saying, "Go ahead, they can't force me to give you a key for free if you're the one who lost it." I hissed that I never lost it. He changed the lock. He just shrugged, no concern. Eventually, I paid the $50 because I had no choice if I wanted free access to my building. My paralegal friend updated our complaint, adding these new incidents. The housing authority scheduled a meeting for the following week, asking me to attend along with Justin. The day of the meeting arrived. I was nervous, but I had a folder of evidence, photos, letters, recordings. Justin strolled in 5 minutes late, ignoring me as he took a seat. The official explained they'd discuss the complaints and see if an amicable resolution was possible. I presented my side. Then Justin, in a sickeningly polite tone, claimed I was a problem tenant who never followed procedure, constantly demanding freebies, refusing to pay rent on time. I was appalled at his audacity. I countered that I had bank statements to prove timely payments. He smirked, saying maybe I faked them. The official frowned, unimpressed with his baseless claims. When I played the voice recording of him threatening to make my life hell, he got angry, accusing me of illegal recording. The official reminded him it was a one-party consent state. He tried to spin it that I was harassing him with recordings. The official asked about the typed letters. Justin claimed no knowledge, implying I might have fabricated them. My frustration soared. But the official could see something was off. They said they'd consider the evidence and get back to us with recommendations, urging both parties to refrain from retaliation in the meantime. Walking out of that meeting, Justin shot me a glare. "You're going to regret this," he muttered under his breath. I quickly turned on my phone's recorder. "Threaten me again, Justin?" I said, voice trembling with anger. He just rolled his eyes, spat on the ground, and left. I exhaled, heart pounding. Over the next few days, I tried to keep a low profile, but the harassment ramped up. My mail vanished from my mailbox. I started shipping packages to my work address. Small dents appeared in my car door, though I couldn't prove it was him. I noticed a reeking odor by my door. Someone had poured rotten milk or something similarly foul under it. It was disgusting. Every day felt like a war zone in my own home. My appetite vanished, sleep was restless, and my work performance suffered. Finally, the housing authority's official ruling came in. They found that Justin had engaged in questionable conduct, but there wasn't enough to impose a formal penalty. They recommended I be reimbursed for the plumber's bill and that any further rent increases be postponed until the lease term ended. But it wasn't binding. It was just a recommendation. Justin ignored it. My paralegal friend said we could file in small claims court, but that could take months or longer, and even if we won a judgment, collecting it might be difficult. Meanwhile, Justin seemed determined to make me break my lease and leave. One day, I was at my wit's end. My mailbox lock was jammed with super glue. I had to pry it open with pliers. Then I found my monthly rent check on the ground, torn in half. I'd left it in an envelope taped to Justin's office door, the only method he allowed for rent submission. Now it was destroyed. He could claim I never paid. I took photos, fuming. Enough was enough. I decided I'd break the lease, swallow the penalties, and find a new place. My mental health was worth more than this battle. But as I looked at rental listings, I realized it was extremely tough to find anything in my price range on short notice. Plus, my job wasn't guaranteed if Justin kept calling my boss with rumors. My parents were out of state, so I couldn't crash with them easily. I felt cornered exactly as Justin wanted, yet living in constant fear was unbearable. I started looking at short-term sublets, even if it meant living out a spare room somewhere. I considered moving in with a coworker temporarily. The coworker was sympathetic, but said their lease didn't allow subletting. Another friend was in a studio, no space for me. It felt hopeless. Then, a stroke of luck. Greta, the older woman who'd told me about Justin's rumors, approached me. She said she was fed up with Justin's neglect. Her toilet had been broken for weeks. She was planning to move in with her daughter in a different county, and her daughter had a friend who owned a small rental cottage outside town. The friend was apparently looking for a reliable tenant. Greta offered to put me in touch. I jumped at the chance. Within days, I connected with this friend, toured the cottage, and fell in love with the quiet setting. The rent was slightly higher, but the landlord seemed kind. I decided to go for it, to break my lease. I'd deal with the financial fallout. On a Saturday morning, I started packing. I didn't tell Justin, obviously. I wanted to vanish without giving him the satisfaction of interfering. But by midday, he showed up, maybe alerted by the sight of a moving van in the parking lot. He strolled up, hands on hips, glaring. "Running away again, huh? Can't handle the real world." I ignored him, trying to lug a box of dishes. He stepped in front of me. "You owe me the rest of the lease payments," he growled. "You can't just skip out." I squared my shoulders. "I'll settle any penalties by mail or through small claims if you insist," I said. "But I'm done living under your harassment," he scoffed. "You think you can just walk away? People around here know you're a deadbeat. Good luck renting anywhere else." My heart hammered, but I forced calm. "I already found a place," I said. "And if you keep slandering me, I'll sue for defamation." He took a step closer, invading my space. "You'd need a real lawyer for that, shrimp. You can't afford it." I lifted my phone, which was discreetly recording again. "Want to bet?" I said. He glared at the phone, then turned and stomped off, cursing under his breath. I managed to finish loading my stuff without further confrontation. As I drove away, I stared at the rearview mirror, the old Victorian building shrinking behind me. A swirl of emotions welled up: anger, relief, sadness that it had come to this. But mostly relief. I was finally free of Justin's physical domain. That night I moved into the cottage, which smelled faintly of cedar and had a tiny kitchen overlooking a backyard pond. A sense of peace enveloped me, though anxiety still lingered, the scars of constant harassment not disappearing overnight. The next weeks were a period of adjustment. The cottage was a half-hour drive from work, which meant longer commutes, but the tranquility was worth it. I worried Justin might still try to sabotage me at work. Sure enough, my boss mentioned receiving another call from him claiming I owed thousands in back rent. I showed my boss the lease, the canceled checks, the partial legal letter. My boss sighed, telling me to keep personal drama out of the office if I could, but at least he understood better now. I also consulted the paralegal again. She said we could file a formal lawsuit for harassment, breach of the lease, and defamation. It might be a strong case given the evidence, but it'd cost time, money, emotional energy. I was exhausted, yet part of me wanted to see justice, to hold Justin accountable so he couldn't keep abusing tenants. After some thought, I decided to proceed with small claims for the plumber's bill, the illegal rent increases, and to recoup my security deposit. I also reported the defamation to the Better Business Bureau and left a detailed online review about his property management tactics. Maybe it wasn't much, but it was something. Over the following months, I built my new routine. My neighbor at the cottage was a friendly older man who brought me homemade jam. The new landlord was responsive, fixing a leaky faucet within a day. It was almost surreal how normal it felt to have a decent living arrangement. My anxiety subsided slowly. I started sleeping better, focusing on my job more effectively. My boss even gave me a small bonus saying he was impressed with how I'd handled adversity. I told him I was grateful for the support. Meanwhile, the small claims court date arrived. Justin didn't show up. The judge ruled in my favor for the plumber's bill plus some fees. Collecting might be another story, but it was still a victory. I took that ruling to the local housing authority, updating them on the case. They said they'd keep a record for any future complaints against Justin. I heard from Greta that more tenants were complaining, forming a sort of informal union to push back on his neglect and harassment. Maybe, just maybe, he'd face real consequences someday. One evening, months after I'd left, I ran into an old classmate who still lived in town. She mentioned Justin was in hot water with the city over code violations in some of his other buildings. Faulty wiring, mold issues. He might face hefty fines or be forced to sell. The news gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. Karma, perhaps, was catching up to him. Part of me still harbored a deep resentment toward him, remembering all the psychological torment he inflicted for so long, but I tried not to dwell on it. My life had moved forward. I had my own safe space, good friends, a job I liked. Justin could no longer loom over me, physically or mentally. Sometimes, on quiet nights in my cottage, I reflect on how things came full circle. The childhood bully who pushed me off a swing had grown into a vindictive landlord who spread rumors and raised my rent out of malice. But I escaped his grasp. I refused to let him define me as a freeloader or any other slur he concocted. In a way, the whole ordeal taught me I could stand up for myself, even when the deck seemed stacked. I wasn't that trembling kid on the playground anymore. I was stronger, wiser, and determined never to let anyone corner me again. I still have nightmares sometimes, though. Dreams where Justin is at my door, threatening to evict me, laughing as I struggle to defend myself. In those dreams, I feel the same helplessness I did as a kid. But then I wake up in my cozy cottage, the morning light filtering through the curtains, and I remind myself I won. I'm free. The rent checks I write now go to someone honest. The rumors Justin spread have faded, overshadowed by my steady work and the support of real friends. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine to shape. If there's one takeaway from this twisted journey, it's that bullies often thrive on power imbalances, and as adults, those imbalances can become more dangerous. But adult bullies can also be challenged and exposed. It's not easy, and the system doesn't always offer swift justice, but persistence matters. Documentation matters. Allies matter. And self-worth matters most of all. Because once you realize you deserve better, you find a way to escape, even if it means risking financial penalties or shaking up your entire life. I heard rumors recently that Justin might have to sell the Victorian property. I'm not sure if it's true, but if so, I hope the new owner treats the tenants better. I still keep in touch with a few of them, letting them know about legal resources. Occasionally, I swing by to say hi to Greta's daughter, though rarely do I pass the old building. The sight triggers unpleasant memories. Yet I'm proud I stood up, even if I had to run away in the end. Because walking away from a toxic environment isn't weakness, it's survival, it's self-care. And in my own quiet corner of the world, I've rebuilt my life without fear that someone like Justin can tear it down again. Maybe I'll never see him again. Maybe I will in some unexpected grocery aisle or at a traffic light, and he'll glare at me with that old sneer. If that day comes, I'll stare right back. Because no matter what he says, no matter the rumors, the intimidation, the petty rent raises, he can't break me like he did when we were kids. I'm done giving him power. The freeloader label was always a lie, and so were all his other insults. Deep down, maybe he's the one who can't escape his own insecurities. Meanwhile, I'll keep moving forward, free from the chains of his bullying, one day at a time.